Hey there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back. It's another Red Pill Religion podcast, Red Pill Religion, where amongst the things we say is that it is okay to criticize any religious or non-religious group, ethnicity, nation, or culture. We aren't allowed to say just bad things or bad things. We're allowed to criticize. So if you like our work, please support what you see here on redpillreligion.com. We've been censored many times on YouTube, so the most reliable place to find us if you lose us is always going to be on redpillreligion.com. We are, in fact, doing a fundraiser with the Freedom from Atheism Foundation on Facebook, trying to raise $1,000 to upgrade our podcast presence. So please check the link in the low bar and on redpillreligion.com. We just started the fundraiser off, so we would love your donations. We're trying to reach $1,000. So throw in what you can for us. We'd really appreciate it. And otherwise, we appreciate the regular tips and donations we get on Subscribestar. We're looking into getting into WeGather app, and we do appreciate all of you who hit us on Subscribestar, Bitcoin, or any of those. Now, tonight, we are, in fact, going to be joined by Mischa Popoff, a conservative commentator who joined us before. Say hello, Mischa.
Hello, everyone.
And Mischa's got a lot of input. He's been a writer for Culture Wars. He's been a talk show host and a conservative columnist. And we've had him on a couple times before now. Tonight we're going to be talking about Israel and what they're affectionately called. Well, let's say the Israelis. Now, we've been spending a lot of time looking at Michael Jones and his work on the Jews and a lot of the insightful and interesting and provocative things he has to say. One of the things I finally just kind of, before we go on this, one of the things I've kind of finally gelled on is that although I love the guy and he's right about most things, actually, especially when he's talking about the cities and a whole lot of history, I get too uncomfortable with sloppily just referring to the Jews in the abstract in quite the way he does. Because I really do think this matter. We did a whole show on this with one of our Jewish friends and maybe doing it with another one, a couple of others soon. I think it doesn't do to refer to the Jews in the abstract because too many Jews hate each other and fight with each other. And we worked up a sort of taxonomy of Jews that we'll be using in this show, just not as a liberal, pap to sensitivities, but I really think when you look at the Jewish population, they do break up into these 5 useful groups to look at, which is that some are globalist Marxists and very committed to that cause, and often hate their own Jewish identity and often hate the state of Israel. Although, there's a little bleed over there. Then you have the hardcore Zionists who, in fact, are ethnic nationalists for the state of Israel and are generally pretty secular and very cynical about religious matters. You have your observant Orthodox Jews, or at least your conservadox, who know there's a God and are often at odds with the Zionists and even more so with the globalist element. Then you have your average citizen Jews, who could be leaning toward any one of those 4. Might have some incoherent leanings toward all of them, but the average citizen Jew isn't involved in anything nefarious. He's as much a pawn of larger forces as the average American citizen, the average European, the average Brit, whatever. And finally, the interesting thing about that is, of course, when a Jew converts to Christ or maybe to Islam, they cease to be identified as Jewish at all. But there are a few who hold on to that identify. So we can recognize a Jew who's become Christian who still is holding on to his Jewish identity. There's a number of them out there. Does that all actually look like a fair chart of way of looking at Jews to you, Mischa?
Yeah, that's very inclusive. I think you've got everything in there, and then it just becomes a matter of maybe discussing the bleed over, or what I would like to get to, Max, is who out of these 5, who are the victims? Because remember, the first victim of the Zionists is always the Jews themselves. It's the rank and file Jews, I think. But yeah, I think you got it nailed there.
Thanks. I may send this to Michael Jones because I actually do think sometimes we start get sloppy and we say the Jews and we're not being bigoted, but we've lost some precision. I think this is very precise, especially because I can tell you for a fact that Zionists, globalists often like to murder Orthodox Jews. Zionists and globalist Jews often like to murder each other, even though, and of course they murder non-Jews too. It's not like it's all a Jew killing each other thing, but and also non-Jews kill Jews too, but that's not what we're going to talk about here. Now we're going to look specifically at the issue of Israel. And what I think some people would say, well, there goes the Jews again. Netanyahu's Iran dilemma. Netanyahu really wants Trump to get us into war right now and is very admittive of it. But is he just representative of the Jews? No, he is the Zionist element. That's what he is. And that's how he's absolutely a Zionist. I would say Bibi Netanyahu is an ethnic nationalist who has deep contempt for Orthodox Jews in Israel and deep contempt actually for Orthodox Christians of various sorts within Israel and within Palestine. But is extraordinarily friendly to the point of practically fellating American evangelical Christians. And that's a problem for me in a number of areas. It's one of the reasons why I'm less friendly to Israel as I once used to be. And then we do say this, and Mischa brought it to my attention, but still, this headline says a lot to us. This is out of Haaretz, which is an Israeli newspaper, a fairly middle-of-the-road one, by the way. And look at this. Netanyahu, he's the prime minister of Israel. It's prime minister, right? Not president? Yeah, prime minister. I get confused because they do have a president, as I recall. But he's not very politically important. Anyway, Netanyahu's Iran dilemma, getting Trump to act without putting Israel on the front line. That is a really giving away, that's actually a damning headline, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. See, with the first and second Gulf Wars, which occurred under both Bush presidencies, we were told, we got to keep the Israelis out because if the Israelis come in, to help free Kuwait, or in the second go around to help capture Saddam Hussein, if the Israelis get involved, it'll become a religious war. So it's like we were doing ourselves a favor, Max, by avoiding the spilling of Israeli blood, which is ridiculous because both of those wars, especially now in hindsight, it's 100% clear, both of those wars were for Israel. So
Wait a minute, which of the wars are you talking about?
Sorry, what?
Which wars?
The first and second Gulf Wars.
Basically the entire thing with Iraq.
Sorry? Yeah.
The whole thing with Iraq and Kuwait to whatever extent, and it bled over into the other areas, but it's mostly the whole Iraq thing. Now that's interesting because I used to follow the Iraq conflict very, very, very closely, and I'll actually tell you a story that I don't get to tell people too often. I, at one time, was an extremely well-known blogger, much bigger than I am now. And, fine, whatever has been, if you want to say it that way. But back in the early to mid 2000s, I was one of the best known bloggers on the planet, and blogs were really big in those days. I flamed out. Partly I was destroyed by my enemies, and partly I had a personal collapse. But in either case, during those days, I was very close to the Bush White House. I mean, not like taking meetings with the presidents, but we did, we did get to be in a White House press conference. We got invited to the Republican National Committee. We were put on mailing lists from the Department of Defense to give us war updates, and even got to attend conferences with military officers telling us about stuff that was going on in Iraq. And there was a whole bunch of us that we were called the war bloggers, and we were supporters of George W. Bush and supporters of the Iraq conflict. We all had different reasons. Some was pure patriotism, some was gung-ho machismo. Some of it was that we were actually convinced that we really were going to go into Iraq, get rid of a bad guy that we had been propping up for too long, and help them establish a stable democracy. And when I was working, covering that, and talking and dealing with people who were on the ground, even in Iraq, and seeing reports from them and stuff, I watched this whole thing go down where we, who were like running this independent blogosphere and getting information from the Department of Defense and from the White House, we got a lot of information, none of which appeared in the mainstream press at all. And it was shocking to a lot of us. I know people like Glenn Reynolds, the Insta Pundit, Vodka Pundit. Some of them may not remember all this, some of them will. Because the bottom line is, by the time the decade was out, like said by 2010 or so, it had become obvious that we were being used by the Bush people, and we're being fed information. We were showing how that the mainstream press was lying, but the Bush administration was also lying to us and manipulating troops on the ground. And I've had this horrible experience over the years where the war I saw was not the same as the Iraq war. that was in the media, which was not the same as the Bush people talk about, which was not the stuff that the guys on the ground saw. And I've even got multiple veterans of Iraq who will tell me everything they saw does not match at all what was in our news or any of the standard narrative we hear about Iraq now. So there's a lot of stories, but the more I look at it, and I know I'm saying a lot, but I saw a lot. Even Jean Baptiste, who is on the Red Pill Religion team, served in Iraq and saw some amazing shit that still nobody knows about.
Yeah.
But the bottom line, what I'm trying to communicate there is there are people playing disinformation all the time. It's one of the reasons I don't trust things like QAnon either, because I've had a White House feed me a line of bullshit and make me their defenders, be able to say, oh, look how the press is lying about me. Look how the press is lying about me. But I just won't mention that I'm also lying too. And I'm using you and I'm letting you defend me and be distracted from the other lies I'm actually telling by defending me from my enemies. Yeah. It's actually a classic game that people in politics play. And so, I mean, I have eventually concluded, yes, they were totally lying on us on Iraq. But what, in your opinion, was Israel's main interest in Iraq?
Well, it goes back to their founding philosophy from the, what is it, from from the Nile to the Euphrates. You know, last time we spoke, we spoke about what the Star of David really is. There was no Star of David. It's the Star of Remphan, which Jesus refers to in the New Testament, and he does not refer to it kindly. So there you have the Israeli flag with the Star of Remphan in the middle, and then there's two blue stripes. The blue stripes represent the Nile and the Euphrates. So that's what they're after. And they don't care if it takes another 100 years. So, you know, it's like climbing a ladder, 3 steps up, 2 steps back. They're fine with that as long as it's gradually, slowly but surely progressing. And what you said about the lies, yeah, I mean, Stalin said that. He said it's like peeling an onion. It's just layer after layer. So yeah, I've met Iraqi veterans who saw things. Like one Iraqi veteran told me he saw little children who their skulls, they'd all been shot in the head, Max. And I said, wow, did you tell, you know, like CNN? I was still, I guess like you at the time, I was still kind of naive. And I thought, wow, if we could just get that out so people would know what Saddam Hussein was doing in Iraq. And he just shrugged. No, you know, it's just part of his routine. And I see now, those kids were probably killed by agents of someone, agents of America, agents of the Israeli Mossad. Who knows? I doubt very much. Let me put it this way. I doubt very much a rank and file soldier in Saddam Hussein's army, even an officer. I don't see an officer in Saddam's army giving such an order. I don't see Saddam's troops carrying out such an order to kill children. And we know who's been doing that since it's ISIS. And we know who ISIS is being backed by. Ironically, we're, you know, indirectly or maybe even directly backing ISIS.
We have been backing ISIS for some time. That's one of the most shocking things that's come out over the last 10 years. Our press doesn't talk about it. I don't know how deeply we would have been in Iraq into ISIS's business 10, 15 years ago when we first went in there. But we're deep in their business. I mean, one of the reasons why Trump is able to say ISIS has been defeated is because Trump cut off their U.S. funding.
Yeah.
And it's shocking and disturbing that people don't even know it went that way. But I mean, when we go back to Iraq, dude, I was actually literally a lot of us were being fed a load of lies, basically showing us that Iraq was being successful. And we believed the Bush administration was showing that when they were letting us think that, and that the press was lying and that Iraq was actually going better than the press was letting on. Well, it was for a time, but then we eventually saw how it was true. All these contractors and others came in and destroyed anything good that our troops might have done. And they did do a few good things because I was involved in a couple of projects to help people in Iraq, including something called Operation Give that nobody even remembers. But in any case, we were lied to, though, because they had intended to crush Iraq and make it something new all the time. And they were never going to make it a real democracy.
No,
they lied about that.
Work, would it? That wouldn't help greater Israel span from the Nile to the Euphrates. I mean, goodness, that's the last thing the Israelis wanted, was for Iraq to become what we were promised it would become.
And so this is what I'm not getting though. What is the goal? To take over Iraq long term, or just take
to destroy it? So yeah, you're right. So we were backing ISIS, who were told is our enemy. ISIS was concocted in response to Barack Obama's withdrawal from Iraq. By all accounts, we had won. We defeated Saddam Hussein, and I'm not a fan of Barack Obama, but he looked at the map, and said, "Okay, well, we're done. Let's get out of there." And he was right. But as soon as he pulled out, the deep state, the CIA and the Pentagon, in conjunction with Mossad and Israel, they said, "Well, this won't do." So they created ISIS as a way to kick sand in Barack Obama's face. As in a way, in other words, Max, to say, see what happens when you pull out of Iraq too soon, you silly president. And so those guys went out. They didn't lay a finger. They didn't touch one hair on the head of any Israelis at all. And that should have been our first clue. Our second clue was, as I said, about the children, the little skulls with holes in their heads from having been shot. They killed indiscriminately. They kill women and children, and their favorite target was either Christians or moderate Muslims. So all you have to do is, figure out, well, who are they attacking? And from that, you could then turn around 180 degrees and figure out, well, then who's backing them?
And this is one of the things, you just said something that gets me too, because I have known, as somebody who's been, I don't know what to tell you. Some people lose their minds and call me an Islam apologist. But the fact of the matter is that this has been going on a while now. There are Muslims who really hate terrorists and actually do carry through and try to protect their Christian friends. And Christians should be grateful for that when it happens, because it's real, especially in places like Kurdistan and other places too, though. And second, moderate Muslims who want peace are often the first targeted for killing, and not just by their fellow Muslims, but also by Mossad, also by CIA, KGB. Historically, I don't know what KGB is doing in the Holy Land these days. Is Russia even doing much down there? Of course they are. I don't even know what they're up to, though.
Well, yeah, they're mainly in Syria, I guess, maybe in Lebanon, but mainly in Syria.
Right. That's what makes the most sense. And here we have it. What's this story we're looking at? The Israelis want Trump to go to war with well, actually, they want. I keep getting it straight. Do they want us to be in conflict with Syria or with Iraq or with Iran at the moment, or they just want us to go after all three of them?
Well, Iraq is finished. I mean, even if they elect so-called democratic governments, the country is fractured. So remember, you have two factions: the Sunnis and the
Sunnis, the Shia, and the Christians are almost gone.
Yeah, and so Iraq is really right where the Zionists, the Israeli Zionists, want it. Iraq. Syria is the highway to Iran. I mean, attacking Iran, even warmongers in the Israeli war cabinet of Netanyahu, they know Iran is a tough one to crack, even with all the might of America. So Syria is it's like the front step, so to speak. They can start a skirmish there. They can drag Iran in, maybe weaken Iran by getting Iran to overextend itself in Syria. But I think everyone knows, even John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, who are constantly talking about bombing Iran, I think they know Iran is too tough right now. It's too strong. So that's why they're in Syria. But to go back, I think Iraq is finished. It's right where Iraq is right where the Zionists want it. Are you there? Hello?
Okay, I'm sorry. I had a technical issue here. I very much apologize. I'm back, though. What I was going to say is, I want to be clear on what I have come to see Zionism as somebody who's been watching it for decades, and the scales almost come off my eyes when I finally saw it. Zionists are ethnic nationalists. It's what they are. They're secular ethnic nationalists, which means as much as it might offend them, they are closer to the likes of Mussolini and Franco, and yes, the big Mr. guy with the funny mustache from Germany. They're closer to those fascists than they are to anything else. And they are ethnic nationalists, and like ethnic nationalists everywhere, they tend to want to rule the world too, not just their own country. And that is what I see out of the Zionist element in Israel at this time, which is why when I hear they're the enemies of the human race, well, not all the Jews are, but I think the Zionists are, or they sure as hell can be until they reform their movement. And it does seem like the Zionist element doesn't necessarily need to occupy or feel that it occupies a country as long as it controls it.
Yeah.
I mean, and so it does make sense to me, but I mean, what do they benefit out of a destroyed Iraq, for example?
Oh, then it's ripe for takeover at a future date. I mean, they will eventually take it over and populate it, the same way they're populating with the settlements, the illegal settlements in Israel. I think that's their plan, is just to start spreading.
Like over a period of decades?
Sorry?
Like over a period of decades?
Yeah, I mean, that would be 100-year plan. So Iraq is right where they want it, because they could, you could fast forward the clock by 10 or 20 or 30 years and nothing is going to change in Iraq. There'll never be another, coalescing leader like Saddam Hussein. So that's right where they want it. In fact, what they want is as you said, they know they don't have to control a country. They don't have to, control it the same way the British did when they had the British Empire. What they need, Max, is for countries to become democratic, because then they control them, don't they? Look how they control the United States Congress. I think back to Barack Obama, he was planning to veto the $30 billion spending program that we gave the Israelis. And that was in his second last year. He was planning to veto it, but to his surprise, Netanyahu and the Zionists, they had a filibuster-proof vote of Democrats and Republicans in the Congress, in both houses. So that just shows you how powerful they are. When they're using our money to bribe our politicians, and so even Democrats and Republicans all agreed, no, we got to give Israel $30 billion in defense.
Right, because Israel is so important to U.S. interests. I could actually defend the idea that Israel was important to U.S. interests during the Cold War.
Yeah,
you could. I mean, I don't know that it was necessarily the right strategy, but at least you could rationally say we have a reason. Israel is useful to our Cold War aims. We could say that. That's been gone for a long time, and it's not clear to me, just like it's not clear to me why frickin', any other country's defense is our problem. I mean, it doesn't make sense, and yet we're spending huge money, and it is very much, as you say, it has become very disturbing to me, because you'll get accused of anti-Semitism when it's not true. There is a disproportionate, enormous number of Zionists controlling elected politicians in both the Democratic and Republican parties. They get it done differently, which is very tricksy, I have to admit, because they'll go after like AIPAC and the Jewish lobbies, the Zionist lobbies in the Democratic Party, go after, like, I guess, the shared victimhood of the Jews and the idea we're going to have solidarity with you poor suffering blacks, Asians, whatever, because we're Jews and we're victims too. And then on the Republican side, it infuriates me. They go after evangelical Christians and suck up to them and get them to embrace a theology which has the modern nation state of Israel as the biblical kingdom of Israel and part of end times prophecies. And you know what? The Zionists doing this don't believe any of that, but are happy to give American evangelicals money to promote it anyway, because it makes Israel more secure. Because they get all these Christians in America think, oh, Israel is so great, Zionism is great. Israel is this poor, tiny little country hated by the Muslims and everyone else around them, and inside, and they don't do anything bad ever except to defend themselves from the evil Muslims / Arabs. And that's not actually what's been happening in Israel. I'm sorry, it's just not. I used to believe all that. I call that my blue pill version of it, belief of Israel. I really thought it was a tiny little oppressed country that everybody hated just because they were Jews. That is not what Israel is at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
It is not a tiny little helpless country. It is not just defending itself because it wants to exist and nothing else. It is democratic, sort of, but really they don't really treat their various minorities all that well. And they don't treat the average Jew on the street that well. Hell, even the Jews they send into settlements, they often screw over later after they get them to go into these settlements. Because it's exactly like you just said, Mischa. The everyday Jew on the street, the everyday Israeli, they don't give a shit. Sorry to swear, but they don't. The Zionist element wants, they are ethnic nationalists. They totally are ethnic nationalists. They're racist to the core, and they want supremacy for their people. And they don't care how many of their own people they have to kill to get it, of course.
Not at all. No, not at all. And it's worse than that. Now you've said a couple of times they're ethnic nationalists, and they definitely are. But it goes a step deeper, Max, because they're actually real estate agents. There's no private property in Israel. None. It's all owned by Knesset or by the Rothschilds, whoever founded the country and built the courthouse and the parliament, whatever.
Really?
There's no property. Now some will say, well, we don't really have private property here either. I mean, your name might be on the deed to your house, but you still have to pay property taxes.
Right.
But there
and all that.
You're literally leasing your property, you know, whether you have a little a trailer out in one of the settlements, or if you have a beautiful multi-million-dollar home in downtown Tel Aviv, you're literally leasing the property that your abode sits upon. So yeah, it's like ethnic nationalism on steroids. I mean, imagine an ethnic nationalism, as you said earlier, that's really rooted in a kind of fascism. It's to the extreme. It couldn't be any more extreme, to the point where not only do rank and file Israelis, they don't matter to the Zionists, they're just pawns, but they literally don't matter. They don't own their own property. And sure, that they're allowed to carry guns as long as they're a member of the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF. I mean, they don't really have a sector like we do. There's literally no freedom in Israel for Israelis of whatever stripe of those 5 categories you gave us. They are literally not free. They are all wards of the state. They are like serfs, in other words.
I am going to bring this this category system up because I really think it's useful, and a lot of people have looked at it and said this is actually pretty useful because it lets me actually disambiguate who I'm talking about. Now, of course, you may occasionally have globalist Marxists who are down with some part of a Zionist agenda. But yeah, this is useful because really, for those listening, I think it is important to recognize there's Jews who hate each other a lot. And that's useful too. Even if you're going to take the E. Michael Jones position, say they're the enemies, okay, well, know your enemy then. Because they're different. And I don't think they're all the enemy. But in any case, it is useful. The globalists who are strict atheists, the Zionists, I bet you a lot of them, well, the globalists and Zionists probably have a strong occultist element they don't like to talk about. Well, hell, there's the Kabbalists, for God's sake. Yeah, and right now, Israel, the Zionists appear to have not complete control, but massive control over what is the biggest military apparatus ever assembled in human history. In other words, they have a lot of control over the U.S. military, which, by the way, I hate to say this out loud because 10 to 15 years ago, me would have balked at this, but the U.S. has developed into an evil empire. It truly is. The average American citizen doesn't see it, but We are just dropping bombs on people and killing people around the globe 24/7 at this point. It is ludicrous how much we're doing that the U.S. military is doing. The Americans, I'll even be racist, and I'll say the Americans. The Americans are just killing people all over the place, and are involved in the Americans. We Americans are all over the place, killing people and getting ourselves involved in conflicts that are none of our business. Not all for the Zionists, but an awful lot for the Zionists. So really, a disproportional amount for the Zionists. And I don't know what we do about that. I mean, even Donald Trump, who is probably the most anti-establishment president we've had in a really long time, still pretty much dances to the Zionist tune.
Yeah, it looked good right at the start. It looked like Trump was going to buck that trend, but then the Mueller report hung over his head, and I think he made a deal with the Zionists. I mean, why do you think Alan Dershowitz wrote a book in defense of Trump? I forget the title of it, but Alan Dershowitz, the top lawyer, top Jewish lawyer, what does he teach at Harvard? That doesn't have, put it this way, Alan Dershowitz didn't just sit by the fireplace and write that book from the depths of his heart. Mm-hmm. They made a deal that they would call off the attack dogs and, throw him a few, like that book. And Alan Dershowitz would do interviews all over CNN and Fox News, wherever people would have him. And he would basically defend Trump and help guide him through this storm of that's still hanging over his head, really. The Mueller report, as you and your listeners know, it came and went with no effect. But they're still harping on it, right? That there was still collusion and that Trump hid evidence or something. But yeah, so if Trump was genuine at the start, saying he was going to pull us out of the Middle East, that quickly went by the wayside. And as I say, I think there was a deal made between Trump and the Zionists that they would get him through this, in exchange for which, of course, he would give them Jerusalem, and followed by the Golan Heights. And just think of that for a minute. Not only is Trump there, and like you were saying earlier, you could maybe understand why Israel was an ally during the Cold War. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things, but you can understand it. So maybe I could understand that Trump would make this deal, right? Maybe I could. It's what the Soviets used to call realpolitik. Well, but think about this, Max. On the day that they officially had the ceremony for the moving of the embassy, 60 Palestinians were shot by snipers. And not only is Trump there, but Ivanka, his daughter, the mother of his grandchildren, is there. And nothing, they don't say anything. They can't, right? That's part of the deal. And it's just so disgusting. Like you said earlier, a minute ago, we're involved in so many wars, we're dropping bombs on people. But those 60 civilian Palestinians who were shot by Israeli snipers that day, I think that's all the blood that mattered at that point. I mean, Trump could have killed 500 or 1,000 people somewhere else through some nefarious. But boy, when those snipers opened up on the Palestinians, and again, they're all right there. They're right there in Jerusalem for the ceremony, and they just acted like it was, like it was a gay pride parade or something. It was just disgusting.
It's very disappointing, and it does show that, look at this. This headline really is pretty damning. I'm going to bring it back again because I look at it and it almost like a Freudian slip, right? It's just kind of revealing the mentality, which is getting Trump to act without putting Israel on the front line, right? Because the Israeli citizens aren't completely controlled by their government. They will revolt if you push them too hard. But if you can get the U.S. or somebody else, but a proxy agent like the U.S. to do your work for you, then the people in Israel will have no reason to revolt.
That's right.
That is a classic way, huh?
Why would they complain? You're absolutely right. They don't have to do any of the heavy lifting.
That's right. They just go about their business. They can even know it, not even know it's happening, and not care, or maybe care, but can't do anything. So it's not their business. They can't do anything anyway. The average working stiff in Israel, running a restaurant or whatever, has nothing to do with any of this. Look at it. Getting Trump to act without putting Israel on the front line. I think this is the most this actually illustrates how primitive most people's thinking are, because they'll look at that and they won't get it. Well, so they don't want to go to war. So, well, I've even had people say to me, why do you see the Israelis as an aggressive power? They don't, they're not really trying to take more territory, except a few things like the Golan Heights and whatever. But you don't get it. It's not just, Jews who figured this one out. It's Chinese, and it's quite a few other groups of people too. You don't have to win through direct warfare. If you can win through economic warfare or through other means, heck, you even find that in the Bible. The Jews in the Bible, like you read the tale of Judith or Esther or some of the other tales in the Bible of the Jews fighting their enemies, and they were never, they often used trickery and guile and somebody else to do their fighting for them. And that's not stupid either. Like I said, read the Chinese, read Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The Chinese actually have a very good, well-developed theory of warfare. And you read Sun Tzu and he'll say the best way of winning is when you don't fight at all. You get the enemy to destroy himself. You get your enemies to fight each other. That's always way better than having to fight at all. So the people who are thinking and dismissing the idea that Israel is a belligerent, aggressive power because they're not actually sending their own troops out, that's madness. Israel is, whenever they can, and they can't always because they're not totally slaves to the Americans, but whenever they can, they will get the Americans to do their biddings. And dumb Americans often will just go along with it and never ask, why is Israel our problem? Or, now I'm sorry, I'm just ranting, but it really, this is all stuff that the more you see it, the more clear it becomes. I am ranting too much. What do you think?
Well, I think throughout history, there have been cases where forces made use of mercenaries. So, for instance, King George, when he faced the revolution here in America, he got Prussian mercenaries.
That's right.
But it was always a case where, and you described this happening in the Bible, sort of, it's called, it's a smart way to fight. You use other people's soldiers, even if it costs you some money. But this is unprecedented, Max. What we have is this tiny nation that we fund, and then they use the money. It's kind of like the Planned Parenthood scenario, where Planned Parenthood gets $500 million a year. And so they use that money to lobby Congress. So it's a self-fulfilling, it's like a snake eating its tail. So we give the money to Israel, and then they have to buy their military hardware from us, but they also use that money to bribe the politicians. Yeah. And so it's that part of it, I think, is unprecedented. So when King George hired Prussian mercenaries, he paid them with money out of his treasury. Fair is fair. And then our farm boys from the 13 states, they had to shoot these poor Prussian teenagers who didn't even know what the purpose of the war was, and well, we beat them. So fair is fair. But you see what I mean? What we have here is it would be.
Let's get the audience to hear this too. They've got us paying them money in aid. Billions of dollars in aid, and then they take the billions of aid money that we give them, buy weapons from our companies. So that's already, like, what? Okay. Why aren't we just buying the stuff for them? No, we're giving them money. Then they turn and use that money to buy from our corporations and use it to pay members of Congress and others in the Democratic and Republican parties. And then these Democrats and Republicans, both by consensus, vote to give more money to Israel to keep this little game going. Exactly. And it's absurd.
Mercenary force. We're like the Prussians in this scenario. But see, King George was a powerful. He had a powerful army. And he just didn't know how to beat the ragtag revolutionaries in the colonies, so he hired these Prussians, and the plan failed. But the point is, it was a big king of an empire hiring Prussian elite forces. But here you have tiny Israel using our money, and we're the mercenary force. Even with all this aid that we give them and all the hardware they buy from us, we still send our soldiers over, and they're not paying us. They don't pay us for that part in the equation. and we just fight their wars for them.
It's actually not okay. And to be honest, this is the one that gets me in trouble with a lot of people. But I'm going to say I despise the word Islamophobia. I generally refuse to use it. But there is a lot of anti-Islamic propaganda that isn't really true. There's a lot of it. I mean, some of it is true. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Islam is puppy dogs and unicorns and fluffy clouds and the ultimate religion of peace or any of that. But a lot of what gets spread about Islam really isn't true, or is really not entirely fair anyway. And a lot of Muslims wind up getting used because a lot of the anti-Islamic propaganda is used to divert attention away from the fact that there's a Zionist influence here. There's also a globalist interest. And one of the things I've noticed is that globalists, who, by the way, often hate Zionists, also play up hatred of the Islamic religion. But they do that here. They play up hatred of the Christian religion over there.
Yeah.
And hatred for Christians in a big way over in the Middle East and other parts of the world, including even India. I don't even want to get into that part. In other words, when you hear anti-religious propaganda, ask who's spreading it and what have they got to win? Because there's an awful lot of Muslims out there who really want to do something, and it's not always their fellow Muslims stopping them, if you know what I mean. There's a lot of Muslims who want peace. They want no more terrorism. They're not interested in conquest. They want to talk about just stopping all this madness, and they're often killed. Sometimes they're killed by their fellow Muslims, but sometimes they're killed by CIA. Sometimes they're killed by Mossad. Because there's a lot of people who want the conflict, including the religious conflict, to continue.
Yeah, and then CIA and Mossad goes and eggs on, Hamas. Hamas was viewed as an alternative to the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO.
Right.
Because the PLO was genuinely opposed to Israel, whereas the Israelis, the theory is they backed Hamas to get them in because they'd be more of a puppet. And still, though, as a puppet, they'd play the role of, blowing up a pizza parlor in Tel Aviv with innocent kids in it. That's part of the equation.
You've got me here on something. Now, historically, I know PLO was pretty much a communist or a Soviet puppet, but that was decades ago. I don't know where they are these days. Do you actually feel that Hamas is Zionist-backed, is Mossad-backed?
Yeah, just like ISIS is Mossad-backed. And look, here's the actual proof. Look at the Mujahideen in Afghanistan back in the 70s. That literally became the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. So, and no one argues that, right? Even the Bushes will admit that. And the way it's pitched to us is, yeah, geez, we backed the Mujahideen to beat the snot out of the Soviets, and that helped bring down the Soviet Empire, and that was all good, but darn it, they got out of hand. And no, they didn't. The Mujahideen was always what they always were. They were a bloodthirsty terrorist group that didn't want anyone walking on their soil and, fornicating with their women and such. So,
and they wanted money and guns. Yeah, that's what they wanted. Yep.
We knew what the Mujahideen was the minute we made. And by the way, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Carter's Polish guy there, Secretary of State or whatever, he was the one. He reached out to the Mujahideen 6 months before the Soviets invaded, and it was because of that the Soviets decided, we better invade Afghanistan because Carter's moving in with these terrorists, and we're going to lose it. So they moved in rather than trying to control Afghanistan as a satellite puppet state. They decided, after seeing what Brzezinski was doing behind the scenes, they decided, well, we better invade. And Brzezinski admitted this later in an interview. He was bragging that he actually forced the Soviets to invade Afghanistan. And then once they invaded, then we had an excuse to go all in and really back the Mujahideen. But anyway, yeah. So if you say to someone today that ISIS is a creation of the CIA and Mossad, they'll kind of tilt their head or they'll dismiss it. But look at them. The Mujahideen is the textbook example of what we're talking about here. There's no denying it.
And the Mujahideen have been used by American forces on and off for how long, and then they come back here and they say it's all Muslim, 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 Muslim. Well, yes, the Islamic religion is a problem and Islam is a problem, but going into some Badlands and finding some thugs who would like some money and cash to go and do some killing for you is as old as the hills.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of it is. I mean, did you ever see that movie, the Charlie Wilson's War?
Yeah, so that movie starts in the middle of that story. It just starts in the middle. It starts with the Soviet invasion and you know, America is one. Oh, we're just coming off the defeat and the withdrawal from Vietnam, so they're wondering, oh, what can we do to maintain American pride in the world? Oh, let's back this ragtag group of grassroots rebels.
It's a really good film, but once you see a film like that that's about politics, no, you're being propagandized no matter what. It's a really good movie.
Yeah.
But underneath it is, yeah, it starts in the middle. It doesn't get into how we already had a relationship with these guys, with these people, these Afghans on the ground in the first place. And they give you this impression that, you know, there was basically nothing in Afghanistan but rubble and dirt and nothing useful. And supposedly out of nothing, they just started arming a few locals they knew and finally making something happen. And really, that's just a slant that's not true. We had been in with the various Mujahideen forces, at least since the 70s, exactly as you just said. And we've been playing that game for decades with a lot of so-called terrorist groups. Sometimes the terrorist groups are our friends until they're not our friends. Then they're terrorist groups. Until then, they're our friends or they're militants that we work with or whatever. They become terrorists when they're we call them terrorists when they're no longer useful. Well, they were thugs from the beginning.
Yeah, that's right. A terrorist, a murderer doesn't change alliances. He's just a murderer.
Yes.
So he doesn't care. A murder for hire. He just wants the highest bidder. He'll work for the highest bidder. So it's not like their ideology changes. Or in that movie, Charlie Wilson's War, at the end of the movie, they imply, you know, we should have built more schools and paved more roads, and then maybe the Mujahideen wouldn't have transformed into the Taliban and attacked us on 9/11. No, that had nothing to do with it. As you said, we sought out the worst of the worst in Afghanistan. We didn't find the moderates or the ones who wanted to create a democracy. No. We didn't find the ones who want to send their daughters to school. No, we found the worst because we wanted to, you know, kill some Russians. So yeah, they never changed. You're absolutely right. They were what they were, and they still are to this day.
I think it's really helpful, and we're going to wrap up here, but this has been a good and informative stream too. I hope people listening are learning from it. I think it's really important to get your blinders off, and we really do have a media environment that very much feeds a pro-Israel narrative to a point that most people should at this point be getting a little tired of it. I mean, really, if every day I was hearing in the news about how we need to do more to help Canada, I would be getting annoyed with Canada after a while.
Yeah.
If it was Mexico, if it was Taiwan, if every time on the news I turn around, my politicians are talking on both sides of this are talking about, wow, we got to give more money to Taiwan and we got to do more to protect Taiwan, and Taiwan's enemies are all trying to destroy Taiwan, and Taiwan's enemies are our enemies too. At some point, I'd be like, why is Taiwan my #1 priority? Why is Taiwan a constant priority? I think the question is the same with Israel, because it is getting old. And I've talked to any number of everyday Israelis, and they're not exactly in love with their government either. So I think it's useful to start looking. And I do think, I'll let you leave any closing thoughts that you want. I think when talking about these things, I want to spread this little chart of this taxonomy of Jewish people, you know, because it really helps sharpen the mind. It helps remind you too that some of these people hate each other, and some of these people kill each other, and quite a few of these people are just caught in the middle and don't even know what's going on, or they do know what's going on, but they can't get out of it. And I think the Zionist element especially needs to be looked at hard, as even among conservatives, like the people that what are some of the conservative organs that are a little too pro-Israel? National Review has gotten that way.
Yeah.
You can hardly blame Commentary Magazine. They're pretty openly about what they are, but there's a lot of conservative media that's too Jewish, that's too not Jewish, but too Zionist friendly, too Israel friendly, or too globalist friendly. Although it is interesting to note, the Jews are overrepresented among Marxists and Zionists both, and both are very dangerous. But
Yeah.
in any case, more Americans need to be asking, why is Israel our problem, and why is Israel always our problem? Why is it always our problem, and why are we always concerned about fighting their wars for them? Got any final thoughts there, Mischa?
Put that list back up for a second, if you would, Max.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, so you're absolutely right. The globalist Marxists, let's call them the Bolsheviks,
Yeah.
they would never sit down and break bread with the Zionists. Like, the Zionists wear suits, you know, they work on Wall Street, and the globalist Marxists, they wear khakis, and they look like Che Guevara, you know. So they're two totally different types of people. A globalist Jewish Marxist Bolshevik wouldn't want his daughter to marry the son of a Zionist, and vice versa. But I just wanted to point this out. But they're achieving the same goal. They're even if they hate each other's guts, they're both working to create global government. Now, I just want to then jump down to the middle one. The number 3, the observant. Those are, see, here in America, the more Christian you are, the more fundamentalist, like you said, the Baptist, Southern Baptist Convention, they're all in with the Zionists. They even call it Christian Zionism, which is an oxymoron. But it's opposite in Israel and in New York, where you have the observant Orthodox Jews. The more conservative they are, in other words, the less Zionist they are, to the point where they'll join in with Palestinians and stand shoulder to shoulder with them protesting.
And get beat up by Israeli soldiers. Yeah,
exactly. And most of them, by the way, I think I told you this in our last interview, they don't use the Star of David, the Star of Remphan. And now jumping down to the last two, the average Jewish citizen and the Jews who convert to Christ, those are the victim class. Because you got to give it to the observant Orthodox Jews. Netanyahu knows if he uses because the Orthodox Jews in Israel are now forced to fight for the IDF, and he knows if he uses them as cannon fodder, he will lose the next election, because even his Zionist supporters in Israel will say those are our brothers, right? So he leaves them out. They're forced to fight. They're forced to serve, but they don't spill blood. They won't. So it befalls to the average Jewish citizen, or whether he's American or in Israel. Those are the frontline victims. They're expendable, but the most expendable is the last one. You really put this in the right order, Max. The Jews who convert to Christ, they have targets right on their foreheads as far as the Zionists are concerned.
Yeah, and it's amazing to watch. All right, everybody. Well, this has been a fun conversation. Well, a sobering conversation, a stimulating conversation. I suspect we're going to see a lot more conversations like it. We have John C. Wright coming in as usual next week. We have streams planned for every night here. Sometimes we do politics, sometimes we do religion, but we're going to be here every single night. We are also doing a fundraiser, as I believe I mentioned. We are trying to raise $1,000. You'll find the link for that in the low bar. It's a fundraiser for the Freedom from Atheism Foundation, and also to get us some new podcasting equipment. So please kick in a little money if you could. Click that link. We would appreciate it. Check us out here tomorrow night. Please give us a like. Please give us a subscribe. Watch for Mischa and others to appear on this channel in the future. And God bless everybody.
And God bless.